X-Men threats are out there. Threats like the Sentinels and Onslaught are often remarked on and feared, but X-Men foes who appear less frequently can still be just as deadly. Bastion is now more iconic than ever when it comes to being one of the big players in the X-Men rogues and threats gallery. Many people think of Sentinels when they think of big X-Men cybernetic threats, but Bastion is unique in that he is basically a living Sentinel. In the comics, he is mostly just a machine, of course, but one who was raised by humans, giving him human-like traits. But in the X-Men 97 series, he is a literal combination of the two, making him even cooler in my mind. In this series, the Siege Perilous is not involved in his origin story, but instead it was a piece of Nimrod who influenced his creation, instead of him literally kind of being a version of Nimrod, making him part Sentinel and part human here, a literal living machine. Bastion claims to be combining tech and humans together, creating Prime Sentinels, in order to save humanity with his project Operation Zero Tolerance here. But I wonder if, like many other Sentinels out there, he actually might be serving more of the robot's interests than humanity in the long run. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe we won't. Depends on when this video releases. There might be more information after the time of this recording. What are some crazy X-Men threats that you would love to see in X-Men 97? Let me know in the comments. Most people don't think of the Terrigen Mists as being a danger to mutant kind. Most people probably don't think much of the Terrigen Mists at all. But they're there, and you can bet that they are harming mutants if they are around them. As we learned in Humans vs. X-Men when the Terrigen Mists were revealed to be toxic to mutants. Mutants who were exposed to the clouds on Earth ran the risk of straight up dying as a result of exposure. In fact, some actually did. Cyclops, for example, the leader of the X-Men. So what most people might just see as clouds that give the Inhumans their powers, or allow them to access their powers rather, triggering them, to the X-Men team, these are basically clouds of death. Man, I love this next X-Men threat. This is the group known as Horticulture. If you know me, if you've been here before, you know I love Horticulture, and if you're new, welcome in. I love Horticulture. Horticulture is an amazing group made up of a bunch of botanists who each have their own specialty in the field. They also so happen to be a group of geriatric women as well. Their goal is to protect plant life on Earth. It doesn't sound so villainous until you realize how much both humanity and mutant kind stand to threaten Mother Nature simply with their existence, pretty much. Sabretooth is one of those villains who I feel is often undermined and underappreciated. Some people don't think much of Victor, thinking of him as no more than a violent and unhinged enemy for Wolverine. But fun fact, he didn't even first appear as a Wolverine villain. No, he actually first appeared in Iron Fist issue number 14 back in the 1970s. Yeah, he was actually kinda like Iron Fist's foe first, if you can believe that. Over the years though, as we've come to learn more about Victor Creed, we learn he too was a mutant and one with a vendetta against Wolverine, who had killed his brother. Sabretooth wasn't actually upset about the loss of someone that, you know, he loved so much, like his brother, his family member, as he was upset about the loss of someone he ritualistically tormented every year on his brother's birthday. Which is why he took to ruining Wolverine's birthday once he'd found out that Logan was, of course, responsible. Victor might seem like he's all brawn, no brain, but he's actually a master strategist and tactician who is surprisingly good at playing mind games with his enemies, manipulating them into believing what he wants them to believe and often tricking them into committing terrible acts seemingly on their own.
Next up is Black Swan. Now Black Swan is not known by enough Marvel readers, and that's a shame because she is scary powerful. The Black Swans were the disciples of Dr. Doom who had formed a religion around his identity as Raboom Alal. The Swans were used as his pawns to fulfill his missions of destruction of every molecule man across the multiverse to oppose the plans of the Beyonders. So basically, they were created to save the entire multiverse. Yabat Aman Taru is the main Black Swan that we know from Hickman's Avengers leading into Secret Wars. With optic blasts, a ridiculously brilliant mind, force fields, and telepathic powers, she became a major threat to the Avengers as soon as she arrived on Earth 616. She was the one who explained a lot of the major players in the incursions, and I think a lot of fans thought that she was headed for big things after Hickman's Avengers run. But she really just became one more member of the Black Order and hasn't really done a lot since. So hopefully that will change. Eric Williams, like most villains, grew up in a pretty horrible home. He idolized his older brother Simon, who eventually became the hero and Avenger, Wonder Man. Eric was also quite jealous of Simon though for receiving all the love of their mother while Eric was often mistreated. Eric eventually turned to petty crimes and became affiliated with the Magia crime syndicate, and after Wonder Man is assumed dead following a conflict with the Avengers, Eric contacted the Tinkerer, who provided him with a scythe. That, thanks to Ultron's enhancements, allowed Eric to send his victims into comas. Eric became the technological villain Grim Reaper, going on to be a huge villain for the Avengers and eventually gaining mystical abilities allowing him to resurrect the dead, summon demons, and create illusions. He's worked with the Lethal Legion, the Legion of the Unliving, Hydra, and the Apocalypse Twins, and has been part of some of the Avengers' biggest stories, has come back from the dead, and was even the Horseman of Death at one point. While Captain America on Earth 616 has the Red Skull, the Captain America of the near-future reality of Earth 15061, Danielle Cage, has the Golden Skull. The Golden Skull's true origins and identity are something of a mystery, but regardless, the Golden Skull's mission has always remained the same: to raise pretty much everything he could to soothe his warped ego. He doesn't think about anybody but himself, luring desperate people into working for him with false promises and taking them out once they stop being of use. As a genius criminal mastermind, he has fought Danielle Cage many times, and one of his biggest stories saw him breaking into the ruins of the Latverian embassy and getting his hands on one of the world's last working time machines to go back in time to seize control of the world's economy. He was ultimately stopped by the US Avengers after a fight in a solid gold battlesuit. While he may not have the flashy powers of others on this list, he did create a pretty great plan, and that has quite the potential. It's honestly a surprise that Count Nefaria doesn't have the same status in popular culture as Marvel's other high-profile villains, because he's actually kind of a beast. In fact, he's perhaps one of the more powerful non-cosmic villains in all of Marvel Comics. First appearing in Avengers number 13 in February of 1965, Lucino Nefaria gained the energy projection, super strength, and super speed of the Living Laser, Power Man, and Whirlwind respectively, but amplified by like 100. This makes him one of the most powerful humans ever. Combined with his technology and wealth, he has been able to manhandle teams of Avengers, and in his first fight with the Avengers, he was able to capture the team and almost succeed at entirely demolishing their image using holograms. Tony Stark has even said that Nefaria was everything that he himself fought not to become. The Mandarin's rings in Marvel Comics are a set of 10 powerful mystical artifacts that grant their wielder an array of incredible abilities. Created by an alien race known as the McLuhans, each ring possesses a unique power ranging from manipulating the atomic and molecular structures of matter or projecting various beams of concussive force to boosting up psionic powers. The 10 rings are named Remaker, Influence, Spin, Spectral, Nightbringer, Daemonic, Incandescence, Lightning, Zero, and the Lyre, and they're all pretty self-explanatory. The Mandarin's rings make him basically a nearly unstoppable force, enabling him to manipulate energy, control elements, and reshape reality itself. But on top of that, the Mandarin's intelligence and strategic thinking amplify the ring's powers, allowing him to devise intricate plans and wield the potential with precision. He's usually known as a major villain for just Iron Man, but has been against the Avengers a ton of times and done pretty well. And last up for today, first appearing in Fantastic Four number 20 in November of 1963, Owen Reese, who would go on to become the Molecule Man, worked at a nuclear power plant and accidentally activated an experimental particle generator, which bombarded him with an unknown form of radiation, and as a result, his full psionic potential was unleashed, enabling him to control all matter down to the molecular level on a cosmic scale. At his most powerful, he was able to battle the cosmic being known as the Beyonder, and he has transmuted and completely disintegrated items like Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, Silver Surfer's cosmic board, Captain America's shield, and Iron Man's armor. It's not really that anyone doesn't know how powerful and dangerous the Molecule Man can be. He's more often been used by other villains to achieve their goals. He's a threat to the entire universe and was also a huge plot point for the Incursions, revealed to have been created as a secret way of destroying the entire multiverse. Not all threats are purely physical though. First appearing in 1977 Avengers number 165, Henry Gyrick began his career as a government liaison to Earth's superheroic community, starting with the Avengers. Gyrick strong-armed the team, revoking their security clearances and generally making life pretty miserable for for them. Gyrich has also spearheaded anti-mutant initiatives as well, making him one of the biggest overall threats to Earth's heroes. He is a proponent of bringing superhumans, mutant or otherwise, under government control. Even now, after being taken out by Abigail Brand, his legacy of causing trouble for all heroes endures in the Henry Gyrich Re-Education Center, which is essentially just a gulag for mutants. He is an incredibly big threat and nuisance for superheroes in general, but he's never achieved the same kind of hype as powerhouses like Thanos or Kang the Conqueror because he's really just a normal squishy human in a suit and tie who is virtually untouchable due to his position. Graviton is an absolutely underutilized Avengers villain, and it may be just because his power set is too similar to another major Marvel villain, Magneto. The difference is, where Magneto controls magnetic fields, Graviton possesses the ability to mentally manipulate gravitons or anti-gravitons, enabling him to increase or decrease the Earth's pull of gravity on an object, or a person, including himself. He once used this ability to lift a landmass that was roughly 4 miles across and made it fly in the air like a hot air balloon. His powers are certainly Magneto levels of awesome, and he could cause as much trouble for the Avengers that Magneto does for the X-Men. There's all kinds of fun stuff you can do with gravity powers, especially if you put them out in space. Imagine Graviton floating out there gathering up meteors and raining them down on planets. But yet, Graviton is rarely ever seen. The Hood has always been kind of underplayed in Marvel Comics. Initially becoming a supervillain to emulate Electro after he stole a cloak from a demon and gained the arguably weak powers of invisibility and levitation, he was powerful enough to face some of the worst threats in New York City. Parker Robbins saw other supervillains ruining perfect heists because of ego. He thought Hydra and other groups based off of pure hate and supremacy were just kind of the worst, so he just started doing his own thing, and he's actually caused quite a bit of trouble through doing so. He became a doorway for Dormammu, he set up a criminal empire with rules and effective forms of insurance for other villains, he rounded up the Infinity Gems, and he even resurrected Frank Castle's wife and kids. It's just something about him has always kind of kept him from really achieving greatness and recognition. Maybe him appearing in the MCU at some point soon will change that. Tony Masters has an incredible yet simple ability to watch another person's physical movements and duplicate them without any practice or training, no matter how complex those movements are. And with training, he can even predict their every move. As a former SHIELD agent turned mercenary and assassin, Taskmaster is very well known in the superhero and supervillain communities for just how capable he can be. He even pivoted to put his skills to better use, becoming a teacher based out of the Taskmaster's Academy to train government agents, villains, heroes, and henchmen alike. Now, this is just my personal opinion, and I'm not sure if this has already happened yet, but I feel like if given the proper writer and story, Taskmaster would make for an absolutely amazing mastermind for a huge Avengers plot. With his amount of experience and his knowledge of the superheroes and the ways they fight, he could create a master plan to create a whole lot of problems for the Avengers. He may have to team up with another villain to do so and have lots of undervillains under his guidance, but I could see it happening. Now, most villains of Wolverine are incredibly dangerous individuals. We already talked about Gorgon on this list, but unlike him, the villain Cyber has never really been able to show off his true potential. Adamantium encased arms and body, claws that inject victims with hallucinogens, mutant psychic tracking abilities, and even the ability to cast his consciousness into other bodies. Silas Burr has, or at least had, a truckload of impressive abilities and should be a huge threat, but he just kind of isn't. I'm not sure why Cyber has been made to just kind of suck, but he really has. He was even responsible for giving Wolverine one of his most severe beatings up until that point in his long life, and was partially responsible for not only Wolverine's training, but Dawkins as well. But in the gallery of Wolverine rogues, he just doesn't really have anything else to his name. He mainly worked as a lackey to other people, and even though he has all the advantages that he has, he doesn't really become much of an issue for his opponents. At this point, he is on his 4th or 5th body as the new Hornet, and he has transitioned to be a villain for Ben Reilly, Scarlet Spider. And nothing against Scarlet Spider, I like that character, but Marvel downgraded him from Wolverine to not Spider-Man. I feel like people don't really realize just how dangerous the Absorbing Man can really be. Back in the day, that was certainly true, but with his inclusion in more recent stories, particularly the Immortal Hulk, people have come to see just how powerful he is. His main power is, as you probably guessed it, the ability to absorb anything he touches. There's practically no limit as to what he can absorb and take the attributes of. Glass, silk, water, a whole comet, steel, paper, helium? Cosmic energy from an attack by Odin, cosmic energy from a cosmic cube, electricity, gamma energy, and even the magical energies of Thor's hammer Mjolnir. He's grown to the size of a skyscraper and has even absorbed and controlled the mind of the Hulk. Some of this stuff doesn't even make sense, and yet he did it. He's given the Hulk, Thor, the Sentry, and even Odin a run for their money. The main thing that holds him back is he's just kind of an idiot. He's not that bright. That's it. If he ever got an above average intelligence, most of the Marvel superhero community would be absolutely done for. And that's actually what happened in the alternate universe Earth 9997, when he absorbed Ultron's intelligence and could then store different absorption abilities for later use. A tenacious, intelligent, and morally grey villain and brilliant leader in finance, Julieta Nefaria, working under her father, Count Nefaria, became the leader of the massive Magia crime family. That is already a whole lot of power, but in a very indirect sense. In one of her first moments, she actually attempted to infiltrate Stark Industries by charming Jasper Sitwell. Only she actually ended up getting feelings for him and then got into an accident that disfigured her, which is when she got the golden mask that granted her the name of Madame Mask. She has remained a villain to the heroes of the Marvel Universe for a long time, playing a bit more of a hands-on part in major events like Dark Reign and Secret Invasion, although kinda behind the scenes. She has remained a decent level threat for a long time, being proficient in multiple forms of combat, a master of disguise, some ability as a gymnast, and her telepathic resistance. But there was also a point where she acquired a number of magical artifacts that gave her actual powers outside of the Magia. Most recently though, she proved to be even more dangerous in the crossover event Gang War. She manipulated multiple parties in New York City against each other to craft a city-wide war between all of the local gangs fighting for each other's territories. The Spider-Man villain Electro is incredibly underplayed. Often coming across as a bit of an unintelligent, thick-headed thug, Electro has always eluded the big leagues of Marvel villainy, but his power set is on the level of characters like Magneto and Storm. Max Dillon has become a being of electrical energy, able to store up to 10 million volts of electricity that he can use to fire lightning bolts, propel himself off the ground, and even enhance his own physical attributes. In one case, while he was in prison, Doc Ock taught him that he could ionize metals, and in Marvel Knights, he used that ability to deadly effectiveness, taking the lives of many innocent bystanders using various metal objects, and even using his powers to chuck cars like they were baseballs. He's also used his powers to shut down the power grid that powered the supervillain prison known as the Vault, leading to a huge prison break. Electro mainly uses his abilities to do pretty simple things, but it would not take much to make him a major threat. During the 80s, writer Roger Stern was under a lot of pressure to have Spider-Man fight the Green Goblin again. But rather than bringing back Norman Osborn, he decided to create a new villain that was just very similar. Shady business mogul Roderick Kingsley stumbled onto one of Norman Osborn's old hideouts filled with Green Goblin equipment. He then took some time and actually improved said equipment and even improved the Green Goblin formula, making it no longer have an adverse effect on mental health. Now, everyone knows how effective and dangerous the Green Goblin is, but Roderick, as the Hobgoblin, ran an entire criminal empire for years, and he did it without anyone even learning his name. One of the biggest things about Hobgoblin was that no one knew who he was for so long until he was revealed to be Kingsley. But even then, he managed to escape to a private island with millions of dollars. Norton G. Fester just happened to stumble upon a mysterious meteor in an unnamed region that he believed would have contained microscopic living matter, which would solve the riddle of the universe. Unfortunately, no one really wanted to help him find out, so he went at it himself, chipping away at the material until a mysterious gas was released that ended up giving him superhuman strength, stamina, and durability. He decided to use this power to become the villain known as Looter. Now, he was pretty quickly apprehended by Spider-Man and became a model inmate in prison, but after being coerced into using his powers to escape, he actually beat up Spider-Man multiple times before Spider-Man had to team up with Valkyrie, and then eventually Norton put his amazing knack for theft to really good use. He would actually end up stealing a lot of stuff, especially from the Fantastic Four, but he had a knack for stealing and using the equipment of other villains. He stole Unicorn's power horn, which gave him the ability to create force fields, the Ringer's rings, which could freeze other objects as well as increase strength, hover, and be used as a weapon. He stole Stiltman's battle suit with the elongated super strong legs, Mauler's armor, which provided limited invulnerability, super strength, and flight, Shocker's vibro shock gauntlets, and even Paste Pot Pete's pace gun. For an incredibly minor villain, he was pretty darn effective. But speaking of thieves, while Looter is a bit of a joke character and is often just hilarious and ridiculous, Ted Calloway, or Spymaster, is actually really cool and very effective. Spymaster has been a thorn in the side of Tony Stark Iron Man for a while, breaking into Stark Tower multiple times. In one arc, he was the one who put together a team of other underutilized Iron Man villains and broke into Stark Tower, stealing some of Stark's tech. He was even able to steal tech for Justin Hammer, which was the spark for the awesome Armor Wars storyline. He has eluded capture multiple times, and he even let the world believe that he was deceased while he continued to operate in the shadows. Despite first appearing in 1971, he's just always kind of remained relatively unknown to the common audience member, while indirectly being incredibly dangerous, stealing awfully powerful tech and selling it to the highest bidder to cause utter chaos for Iron Man and even other heroes. A mutant with telepathy, transmutation, and superhuman physical attributes, Gorgon was also a polymath genius and an extremely skilled hand-to-hand combatant, even leading the Hand for a time. He came into the comic book world hot, with his absolute strongest feat when he defeated Wolverine with one move, puncturing the mutant's lung with a sword so that he continuously lost oxygen. He was then able to subject Wolverine to Hydra brainwashing and then released an incredibly weakened and brainwashed Wolverine in South America in order to be recovered by S.H.I.E.L.D., who he attacked. With an introduction like that, and with all his various skills and insane intelligence, it's just a huge shame that he hasn't really been able to reach the same heights since, and was eventually wiped out in the X of Swords storyline after joining the mutant nation of Krakoa and becoming one of its captains. Batroc the Leaper is often considered a bit of a joke. However, he's actually one of the deadliest fighters in the entire Marvel universe. George's Batroc is a master of the French style of kickboxing known as savate. Despite having no actual powers, just a peak level of physical strength and the unique ability to jump higher than an Olympic athlete, he's skilled enough that he's even a match for superpowered characters like Captain America and Spider-Man. When he first appeared in Tales of Suspense number 75, he was treated as a deadly and well-respected mercenary, as he should be. Funnily enough though, he also abides by a strict sense of honor that's even caused him to turn on his own employers if they aren't acting with honor. The sheer ridiculousness of Batroc's character alone makes him brilliant, but it's the fact that the character seems to survive almost all of his encounters and fights with superpowered individuals that has made him kind of a bit of a mainstay. Sin, aka Cynthia Schmidt, is the daughter of the Red Skull, and as such she is often overshadowed by her pops. But for a little while she was actually really cool with tons of potential. She was conceived with the intention of Red Skull gaining a male heir, but obviously Cynthia is not male, and it almost meant her end if it wasn't for Susan Scarbo, who convinced the Skull to let her raise the child. Eventually Skull returned and used the machine to both age Cynthia up, but also grant her superpowers. She was eventually captured and rehabilitated by S.H.I.E.L.D., but that was promptly undone by the henchman Crossbones, and the two of them went on the warpath, resulting in the demise of Steve Rogers' Captain America. Yes, Sin was instrumental in the legit fall of her father's greatest rival, but everything returns to the status quo, so Steve did eventually return and Sin was defeated. Despite all that happening though, she went on to gain control of a mystical Asgardian hammer that transformed her into the incredibly powerful Scotty, which was like the main inciting incident for the Fear Itself storyline. She's a really cool villain and one that needs more time in the limelight. I also prefer her to her father. She just feels even more ruthless and conniving. I want more Sin. That sounds weird. Roger Hayden, also known as Psycho Pirate, is quite the capable guy. Hayden wears a faceplate called the Medusa Mask, which can control the emotions of anyone nearby, and he staunchly believed that this was his ticket to riches and power. When heroes or the police try to stop his crime sprees, Psycho Pirate just uses his mask to overwhelm his opponents with shame, guilt, or depression. He can also make a person develop a phobia of anything he wants them to be afraid of, like in his debut, he made Dr. Fate, one of the most powerful magic users in DC Comics, develop cytophobia, aka the fear of food, and then he attacked Fate with a pizza. That's amazing! Psycho Pirate has played a huge part in some of the biggest DC Comics ever, including Crisis on Infinite Earths and Infinite Crisis. If you needed more proof, Amanda Waller, the head of the Task Force X program, aka the Suicide Squad, has claimed that Psycho Pirate is one of the scariest beings in the universe, calling him a man who could make gods go mad and a man who could make the mad gods sane again. Now look, I know that the Riddler is easily one of Batman's top villains, but I still think he hasn't really been able to achieve his true potential. Believe it or not, Batman has actually admitted that the Riddler is more intelligent than he is. Obviously, Riddler is also incredibly insane, but even in his insanity, the Riddler is smart enough and self-aware enough to realize that he is insane, which somehow only served to further expand his intelligence. In terms of street-level villains, few can stand up to the intelligence of the Riddler. Just like Batman himself, Riddler always has backup plans for his backup plans. He plays for most outcomes, but he usually sets traps and plans that are so well thought out, he doesn't even need his backup plans most of the time. He was the one to face the Joker in the War of Jokes and Riddles, he served as a competent villain for even superpowered foes like the Flash, and I don't think it's happened yet, but he could easily make for a really great mastermind behind a plot against a team like the JLA if given the chance. He might have to work on his insanity and riddle obsession though, because he usually gives stuff away. The villain, Dr. Sivana, is a scientific genius, mastering almost all the scientific disciplines that exist on Earth. He is one of the cookie cutters that people think of when talking about mad scientists. He is also the arch enemy of Shazam and the Captain Marvel family. He has elevated himself beyond just being a scientific genius, studying the occult and being able to teach himself how to harness magic, specifically after he joined forces with Mr. Mind and when he reawakened Black Adam, which is when his right eye became capable of seeing magical energies. One of his best moments came in the Multiversity Thunderworld adventures. Sivana literally attacks the Rock of Eternity with a bigger Rock of Eternity, his own Shazam-like team of superpowered children, and his own multiversal duplicates. He manages to take the wizard prisoner and mine the rock for its power, granting himself his own monstrous Shazam-like form. It really is a testament to his level of threat that he is one of the biggest villains for one of the most powerful heroes in DC Comics. The Watchmen comic has this knack for being rather realistic in terms of comic books. This does mean that the heroes who make up the Watchmen, with the exception of Dr. Manhattan, aren't really superpowered, but this honestly makes their version of the smartest man on Earth, Adrian Veidt aka Ozymandias, actually quite terrifying. Ozymandias is wildly intelligent, but because of Watchmen's realism, he doesn't often make the same stupid ego-fueled mistakes that other villains like Lex Luthor, for example, do. The heroes kind of find themselves a little conflicted when facing him, and that's because he is genuinely trying to help everyone, except for the millions or billions of people who perish for his goals to become reality. Because he genuinely did succeed at his plan, staging an elaborate psychic catastrophe in order to trick the human race into thinking that aliens from another dimension were invading our world and uniting them against a common enemy at the cost of 3 million lives. Ozymandias is also possibly responsible for pulling strings throughout the entire multiverse in order to enact his own wills. And finally today, Killer Moth is not someone you see talked about as being dangerous or powerful. Drury Walker first appeared all the way back in Batman number 63 from February of 1951, and his whole shtick is just goofy. Killer Moth wanted to be the criminal's version of Batman, so he got himself a moth signal and a mothmobile. He even set up a false identity as millionaire philanthropist Cameron Van Cleer. He promoted himself to Gotham's criminals using his identity as Killer Moth, giving them each an infrared moth signal to call him to their aid. Now he didn't really fight for them. Instead, he kind of became the distraction for the authorities so that the real criminals could get away. Later on, he would deduce Batman's identity, and at another point, he sold his soul to the demon Neuron and became a giant moth-like monster known as Chiraxes, he may be a bit of a joke, but Mothman has caused some serious problems on a few occasions. Things for Batman got really chaotic around the same time his childhood friend Tommy Elliot showed up back in town. That's because Elliot was actually the villain Hush, working with the Riddler and a whole bunch of other villains to completely bamboozle the Dark Knight and push him to the edge of his limits. Batman Hush was a huge and amazing story arc for Batman, and Tommy for his part managed to stay one step ahead of his old friend, fooling Batman at every turn. Sure, Batman was eventually able to turn things around, and granted Hush has a deep understanding of Bruce and he wasn't the only mastermind behind the entire scheme in its totality, but he did a heck of a lot, especially on his first ever outing as a villain. It's a shame he hasn't been able to show that potential in another story yet. He could realistically cause quite a problem for not only Batman again, but others in the DC universe. Wonder Woman, being a warrior-bound Amazon, sometimes daughter of Zeus, is one tough lady. And as you'd expect, a good chunk of her opponents are equally, if not more, physically intimidating and pack one heck of a punch. And then there's Dr. Psycho. Dr. Psycho is not physically intimidating. He is 3'9" with no kind of super strength. He's short, which can be scary. But what Dr. Psycho lacks in physicality, he makes up for in being absolutely psychotic, but also one of the strongest telepaths on the planet. Psycho can match up to Martian Manhunter in terms of his telepathic prowess and can control multiple different minds with his powers. On top of that, he is just so incredibly sadistic that when combined with the absolute power, he can and has caused a bad day for even someone as capable as Wonder Woman. Vandal Savage was alive 50,000 years ago as chief of a tribe of other cavemen. But when he came into contact with a strange meteorite, it exploded and bathed him in this strange alien radiation that gave him immunity to aging, disease, and fatigue. The meteorite also increased his intelligence to superhuman levels, which combined with 50,000 years of learning, Vandal Savage possesses skills in almost all areas of the human experience, even basically becoming immune to pain. Vandal Savage has become an incredibly solid villain, usually at around a B-level status, as he does cause problems but hasn't really had much of an impact. But I guess he only really needed a couple hundred more centuries, because in DC 1,000,000, set in the 853rd century, he teamed up with Solaris and stranded his time's Justice League in the past and the present's Justice League in his time, which very nearly almost meant the end for both teams. He didn't win, but most villains don't. That's not the point. Mark Richards isn't the first man to take on the title of Tattoo Man. Before him were Abel Tarrant and John Oakes, and their powers are all very similar. According to Mark, his tattoos are apparently made up of the literal sins of the people that he has sent to the grave. These tattoos can then peel off of his body by sheer force of will and come alive. His ink can do a lot of different things and has lots of ways to attack his enemies. Over the years, he has fought superheroes with tattoos of tigers, blam blams, cars, ships, monsters, bears, fire, planes, and even dinosaurs. Tattooed Man has never really been considered a serious threat, despite the fact that he is only limited by his imagination. In Marvel Comics, there is a mutant who has a similar ability, and he was able to access the Phoenix Force with a tattoo of it. Looking at that character gives us a good idea of things that Tattooed Man might be able to do if he was given the right story and the right writer. As some of you nerds may know, nature and plant-based powers in DC Comics are incredibly OP. Think of characters like Poison Ivy or Swamp Thing. Magic-based powers are also incredibly OP. Think of characters like Dr. Fate or Zatanna. Blackbriar Thorn is a character who has a bit of both, or potentially could. As a perfect villain to the Golden Age Green Lantern Alan Scott, who had a weakness for wood, Blackbriar had learned to survive for a very long time by replacing his flesh with enchanted wood. His magic has been powerful enough to face multiple different rosters of the Justice Society, and he's incredibly hard to actually defeat as he can reincarnate himself in new bodies made of wood. His magic makes him a good foil for other magic using heroes and makes him incredibly useful against Kryptonians, and you really only need one writer to make his wooden body, chlorokinesis and geokinesis, connected to DC's The Green, and boom, he is a villain who could cause absolutely massive problems for the entire world.
Unus is of course one of my favorite X-Men villains. I do not think he gets enough love. He is a classic who first appeared on the scene back in the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby days. He was also a villain during the House of M era, though more in the sense that, most mutants were kind of villainous because, they basically were trying to rule the world or were on the verge of ruling the world. Unus the Untouchable is his full mantle, and when we first met him, he was using his mutant powers to cheat in the wrestling ring. Well, I don't know if we can really, call using your mutant abilities cheating per se. I guess in the sense that they weren't being disclosed, and that he wasn't wrestling other folks who were on the same level as him, but instead was, wrestling with just regular humans who just had no powers. As you may have guessed, Unus generates basically a powerful force field which he can control that prevents him from being touched. Unus the Untouchable. The first time around, he gave the whole X-Men team major trouble, and it was only thanks to Beast's smarts that they were actually able to defeat him. Beast was able to make it so that Unus could no longer control his powers, so that they were on full force all the time, which also prevented Unus from eating or drinking anything. Needless to say, they wore Unus down, and he ended up changing his tune and agreed to stop his villainy. The Blob is a classic villain who I just think does not get enough love for how powerful he is. Honestly, back in the early days of the X-Men, after learning he was a mutant, the Blob almost single-handedly took down the entire X-Men team. They at first attempted to recruit him, and that's when he learned he was a mutant, but after learning of that fact and that his abilities were actually mutant powers, the Blob decided that he didn't actually need the X-Men and that he was actually more powerful than all of them combined and cooler than them. And when they refused to let him leave, since they had revealed their secret identities to him, this was back when the X-Men had secret identities, by the way, and attempted to keep him captive in the X-Mansion, after narrowly escaping, he swore to get revenge on them, and honestly, kind of rightfully so. He returned with the rest of the circus and sideshow performers that he worked with, intimidating the ringleader into even taking orders from him. They returned to the X-Mansion and very nearly ended the X-Men team. The Legacy Virus is one of the most deadly threats we've seen in the comics. We've talked about the Terrigen Mists on part 1, but the Legacy Virus plagued the X-Men and the whole world of mutants after being released accidentally by Mr. Sinister. In fact, Mr. Sinister felt so bad about this, he even tried to work out a cure himself for the virus. As much as he's a villain, Sinister still loves mutant kind and definitely did not want to see them completely wiped out. The virus itself was created by Strife, Cable's evil clone. It only affected those with the mutant X gene. The first time a mutant used their powers after contracting the virus, you would see it activate. This original strain of the virus basically acted like a fast-acting cancer in those who were affected, and we know it as Legacy 1 virus, the first strain of the Legacy virus. And that isn't all. There were actually 2 strains for the Legacy virus, and while the second strain was not as fast acting as the first, I would still argue that it was worse. This strain of the virus was slower acting and would actually cause mutants to lose control of their powers before they die, basically becoming a ticking, superpowered, uncontrollable time bomb. But before this happened, symptoms of those suffering from it would include skin lesions, cough, fever, and autoimmune deficiency, lowering their immune system and making them more vulnerable to other illnesses. So yeah, basically this version of the virus was like the mutant version of our world's AIDS. Pretty terrible. Mr. Sinister was once brilliant scientist and geneticist Dr. Nathaniel Essex. Nathaniel, however, turned to more mad science after the loss of his son, sadly. When offered an opportunity by Apocalypse to become more evolved, Essex ended up taking it. He claimed a new name based off of something his wife had called him upon learning of his true nature, Sinister. Mr. Sinister still seems obsessed with finding a way to fix his long-dead son. Sinister has a particular obsession with the Summers family and even created Madeline Pryor, playing matchmaker to set her up with Cyclops so that the two would marry and produce a perfect mutant child, which Sinister later hoped to procure and study. Sinister also managed to devise a plan that allowed him to completely alter reality, making everything and everyone a part of his own sinister universe in Sins of Sinister. Basically like becoming a god, like becoming ruler of the universe. Now don't get me wrong, I think a lot of folks understand just how deadly this next mutant is, but I'm still not sure if folks see him as a real threat just because of where he's at right now. But a friendly reminder that when Vulcan first turned up in the comics during Deadly Genesis, that is just what he was. Someone who was threatening the X-Men after feeling as though he'd been abandoned by them. Vulcan is the other Summers brother. There's Cyclops, there's Havoc, and of course there is Vulcan, the youngest. Gabriel Summers, however, is maybe the most deadly of these three. Vulcan toiled to seize the Shi'ar Empire for himself after marrying Deathbird. When his father, Corsair, demanded that Vulcan Vulcan stop his ruthless pursuit of power, by the way, Vulcan responded by killing him. Declaring himself emperor caused a great rift in the Shi'ar Empire, plunging it into a civil war. He also at times has been just generally a kind of awful brother to Havoc. Not cool, Vulcan. Honestly, this next villain is a terrifying one, and one that was kind of short-lived in terms of his appearances when you consider just how horrific he was. We're talking about Gregory Terrariton, aka Slayback. Slayback was a Deadpool villain who also had tanglings with Weapon X and kind of with mutants a little bit as a mercenary. He ended up being hired by a group who was hoping to use Deadpool's healing factor to find a cure for the legacy virus. Inherently, this doesn't sound super villainous when I say it like that. It's like, well, that would be good, wouldn't it? But at the same time, they weren't doing this out of the kindness of their heart or to just save mutants, but they were simply doing it so they could make a fortune, as once they found the cure, they planned to charge a massive amount for it. Factor 3? That sounds like some kind of toothpaste. This is another villainous team composed of mutants but led by an alien known as Mutant Master. You might not remember it because it was only around for a few issues and also first appeared way early on in X-Men issue number 28 back in 1967. This team popped up a few times and would often force mutants into doing their bidding, often mind-controlling Banshee to attempt to kidnap or help kidnap Professor X. Fortunately, in issue number 39, Factor 3 was defeated for good and hasn't bothered the X-Men since, at least not as far as I know. But were they to come back, who is to say what kind of chaos they could sow? After all, they were a pretty impressive threat when they first showed up on the scene. Roughhouse is definitely a lesser known villain, though that doesn't mean we shouldn't be intimidated by him. Although he starts out as a villain in the Wolverine comics and a brute, he later kind of becomes Wolverine's ally after he was sold off by General Coy to be used for experimentation. Pretty messed up. Even Wolverine felt bad for this guy, despite being his rival and his enemy on Madripoor. Wolverine decided to go after him and as such became embroiled in a major political conflict in Tierra Verde, not to be confused with Terra Verde, a different republic that also exists in Marvel Comics. Despite Roughhouse saving Wolverine though and becoming temporary allies with him, Roughhouse would later go back to being a straight up villain of Logan, even renewing his partnership with Bloodscream, another lesser known villain from the 80s, later on. The Marauders are a team a lot of folks don't think about being a threat, especially not anymore considering we have since redeemed the team name with Kate Pryde's heroic Marauders team. But let's not forget what this team was capable of back in the day, and which powerhouse of a mutant brought this team together. It might surprise you to know that Gambit actually created the villainous Marauders team. Of course, he didn't do it because he was truly a villain deep down or anything like that. He basically did it all for Mr. Sinister. Remember when it was revealed that Gambit had a dark secret in the comics and everyone thought it was going to be that he was the witness and the person who ended up betraying the X-Men? It wasn't that. The secret was that he had worked for Mr. Sinister as a retroactive favor after Mr. Sinister had helped Gambit to control his powers by, well, removing a part of his brain. Mr. Sinister had Gambit assemble the Marauders and use them to attack the Morlocks, who he believed were abominations when it came to his pursuit of genetic advancement, resulting in the, as we know it, the Mutant Massacre. And Sinister also had the team hunt down and steal baby Nathan from Madeline Pryor. So they've done some pretty crazy things. Pretty impressive, crazy, villainous things, you know?
5. Maker. Reed Richards often appears on F4 enemies list because as much as we love him, the man has done some evil things across universes. The most diabolical version of Reed is probably the Maker. From Earth 1610, Reed's life took a hard left. He left Sue alone after a near-death experience, which led her to end things, which led to a bad living situation for him, which led to Reed becoming the worst version of himself. He uses his intellect for evil, which is the last thing you want from a genius, and he tries to destroy the world and even Asgard. His reign of terror came to an end when he was split up by Molecule Man and scattered across the universe, although he is now focused on creating his own reality, so that's fun. 4. Annihilus. When your heroes are facing off against a villain called Annihilus, you know they're in for a hard time. An insectoid tyrant hailing from the negative zone, Annihilus tried to take over, well, everything. He seized control of the cosmic control rod because he wanted to live as long as possible, and he will destroy anyone who could get in the way of that. Not only is his name linked to the word annihilation for obvious reasons, but also nihilism. When you subscribe to one thing, you might as well do the other too. 3. Rama-Tut. Kang the Conqueror is technically the descendant of Reed Richards, the first family, and if Kang had his way, the last two. Kang exists across realities in many forms, and many of them are Nathaniel Richards, a descendant of Reed Richards. Every version of Kang is immensely powerful and a huge headache. During an early face-off with the Fantastic Four as Rama-Tut, he forcibly worked the boys and made Sue try and marry him, so he's been a problem ever since. hands. 2. Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom might be more anti-hero than villain now, but that doesn't mean that his hands are clean. He trapped a young Franklin Richards in hell, like young Franklin, deranged behavior. In a solo series, he destroyed a universe. He proved that love means nothing in his pursuit of power when he removed the skin of his one true love to wear his armor. So yeah, maybe he's like kind of nice now, but how long is that really going to last? And finally, the big bad of Marvel's Fantastic Four first steps, Galactus. Galactus is more abstract entity than concrete being. He appears to you as your brain can comprehend him, so he looks different and terrifying to every race he comes across while searching for his next meal. Galactus's power is nearly unmatched thanks to his possession of the power cosmic. It's a miracle the Fantastic Four have ever foiled his plans, but not one that we take for granted. 10. Molecule Man. Molecule Man's story is rough. He was a lab tech manipulated by the Beyonders into becoming the explosive to end the multiverse. Though he is often viewed as one of, if not the most powerful being in the Marvel Universe, he was involved in the infamous Secret Wars storyline, and comic fans are very interested to see if that involvement will translate to the upcoming MCU Avengers film. 9. Namor. Namor is sitting near the top because he might have started out as a villain to the Fantastic Four, but today he's considered an anti-hero at his worst. Sue Storm and him famously have a will they won't they thing going that has lasted decades. He's more into it than she is though. As the ruler of Atlantis, he has found himself both an ally to those on land and an adversary, but always is defending his home under the water. 8. Ronan the Accuser. Kree warrior Ronan the Accuser was a Fantastic Four villain first, but has now caused problems for dozens of superheroes. As judge, jury, and executioner, this Kree warrior was sent to judge the Fantastic Four for the crime of destroying a sentry. That is not Bob from Thunderbolts. This sentry is a robot built by the Kree. He was defeated by the team, of course, but has bothered them many times since. You might know his MCU counterpart from Guardians of the Galaxy or Captain Marvel. 7. Frightful Four. You've heard of the Fantastic Four, get ready for the Frightful Four. The team came together after some villains realized that they had a shared hatred for Marvel's first family. Teamwork makes the dream work. In the early days, this team was composed of villains that were a little bit Golden Age goofy, but in the modern age, the team has truly lived up to their name, even going so far as to systematically destroy the lives of the Fantastics. They almost won, but Marvel's first family is pretty hard to take down. 6. Skrulls. What the MCU did with Skrulls has to be one of the biggest artistic liberties that they have taken. The MCU originally cast a somewhat sympathetic lens on the alien race, but then, Secret Invasion was closer to what they're actually like in the comics, which is ruthless and devious conquerors. The worst of them being Super Skrulls, the elite warriors usually possessing superpowers in addition to their shapeshifting.
Coming up next, good old Donnie Pierce. Gosh, I love Donnie Pierce. I personally feel like Donald Pierce being a villain of a sort of bygone era is a character and a villain who just does not get enough love, so that's why I decided to include him here on this list. He has accomplished some pretty impressive things, and way before we ever had Bastion, Donald Pierce was it when it came to cybernetic style X-Men villains. Or at least, he was one of the big ones. He's accomplished some pretty cool stuff in his time and almost took out Wolverine with his creations Albert and LCD, who would go on to change their programming so they could instead live independently from Pierce's control. Honestly, fair enough. Still, he came close with that plan, and he's done a lot of other pretty terrible things before, to be real with you. I mean, I love that Bastion is getting this amazing comeback time, but I do wonder what about Donald Pierce? Will we ever see Donald Pierce again? That would be great. The Shadow King is a threat that not many people focus on anymore when it comes to the X-Men. His time for the most part seems to have passed, although he does still appear here and there, but when it comes to his accomplishments and how iconic he's been throughout the years, I think it's important that we all remember his existence. He exists and he's cool. And have I been feeling like he's about to pop up everywhere lately? I have. And is that probably wrong? Probably. But it's just because I kind of love the Shadow King, guys. I'm going through a Shadow King phase right now. Shadow King did, after all, almost completely take out the X-Men at one point, and he has manipulated many of them throughout his life, as well as many of their allies. In certain alternate realities, he actually has also been successful in defeating the X-Men, so there you go. Cassandra Nova might seem like a weirdo, and trust me, she most definitely is a weirdo. If you were thinking that, you are correct. But at the the same time, just because her origin is super weird doesn't mean she should be discounted as a villain. In fact, she might be responsible for one of the sole most terrifying panels that exists in Marvel Comics. This one from the E is for Extinction story arc. Cassandra Nova is often known for hating mutants and being completely devoid of empathy. Recently this changed, but her gaining empathy honestly didn't make her any less terrifying. It just allowed her to temporarily ally herself with the mutants. When it comes to Emma Frost, I think she is a villain most people don't expect to be super deadly because, well, she's now reformed and an X-Men team member. But that being said, with Emma there are two sides to her, almost. There is the time from before when she was with the Hellfire Club and she was an X-Men villain, and there's the time from after, when she ended up finding some redemption and even joining up with the X-Men team and becoming a hero. Yeah, Emma in the before times was ruthless and definitely was a villain that you wouldn't want to mess with. I think a lot of folks now kind of discount her as a villain because, you know, she's been a hero for so long now, but I definitely think it would be interesting to see Emma return to her villain roots and to also see how her time as a hero may have changed her approach to villainy. Back in the day, there was almost nothing too dastardly in regards to what she was willing to do. Remember when she swapped bodies with Storm? That was just downright diabolical. Orcus is another group that seems like a pretty big threat when it comes to mutant kind, even bigger than horticulture. Most people might not take them as seriously because they are newer on the scene, but Orcus is pretty impressive when you consider that they're made up of parts of all of the groups who basically felt threatened by mutant kind's growth and evolution in the Dawn of X era. This included many of their enemies who did not disappear but instead banded together in resistance to the mutants rising up, becoming honestly even more powerful, as well as former mutant allies who had actually begun to grow concerned over how much power and influence the mutants were gaining from banding together. You know it's not good when the allies are joining up with that team, you know what I mean? That's like a lot of power. It's not just enemies, it's allies that have become enemies. Nimrod might sound like a goofy threat and villain for the X-Men in terms of his name, but the choice of name here actually does come from a different meaning for the word than you're likely thinking of. A lot of people think Nimrod and they think dum-dum. Nimrod though can also mean a particularly skilled hunter, which is just exactly what Nimrod is here. Nimrod is an exceptional sentinel who can adapt and improve as they hunt down mutants, learning and changing as they go based on the mutants and experiences that they encounter during their mission. Nimrod has also proven to be exceptionally terrifying, I would say, in recent years, revealing that they are not simply working for humanity, but instead are actually working for AI life, fighting to eradicate not just mutants, but all living beings. So humanity, also watch out. Even worse for humanity, because humanity, we do have some superpowered people in Marvel, but humans are just squishy. They're squishy people.